What's up, fans? Welcome to the Backmarkers F1 Show Power Rankings, the first edition for the 2020 season, and actually the first edition of the F1 Team Power Rankings we're introducing for this season. And it was an idea that one of the fans suggested, and also one that you had as well.
Yeah, I when I saw it, I was like, oh, I've been thinking about that for a while. That's actually a really good idea because we were already doing the driver rankings, and kind of just made sense to do the constructor rankings as well, in our opinion. For this first one, it's kind of a little bit different than what we're going to do for the rest of the season, because obviously the season hasn't officially started yet with Australia. So to start off with this one, we're going to do top 10 teams to include all of them after preseason testing. And then once we get into the races, we're only going to do top 5 to see, who falls in and out of power rankings, rather than just have where do teams place, because, you can already do that with constructors really. So
Right. So it's a little bit of a one-off in this case. So ranking the 10 teams, this is all based on preseason testing for 2020. All right, so same that we do with the driver rankings, we'll start from 10 and go down all the way to 1. Starting at number 10 in preseason testing, we're actually going to go with a little bit of a surprise here. Might shock some people. At number 10, we're going with Haas.
Yeah, and this was kind of debated between us before we went on air, is who do we put in the 10th place? A lot of people would expect Williams, but, from what we saw from Haas, comparing all their stats that we saw, they were just a little bit lower, almost on par with Williams in terms of they had the slowest laps of all the teams. They did the 10th most laps, which in terms of Tina's last place. So yeah, it kind of made a little bit more sense to have them there, but obviously they were better on the short runs.
Obviously, revealing that, then we put Williams at 9.
Yeah.
And again, I just think that Williams made that progression from last season, getting out on track early, doing a lot more laps. And like you mentioned in the stats, they completed the 8th most laps, more than Haas did. And they set a decent time, the 7th fastest time in testing. And they've also made the biggest improvement, 1.2 seconds faster than they were in 2019. So technically, if you look at the stats, it's better than Haas. I just think that Haas struggled a little bit in winter testing, so we kind of wanted to make our own headlines a little bit and put Williams ahead of Haas in that regard. We'll see what happens, though, as the season progresses.
Yeah, exactly.
So we got Haas at 10, Williams at 9, and then at 8th in our preseason power rankings for the teams, we got Alfa Romeo. Now, Alfa Romeo, they completed the 9th most laps in testing with 735 and had only the 9th fastest time. Now, I think that they were doing a lot of different programs, and I think that they were better than Haas. They certainly were better than Williams. Now, they put Kubica in the car in a couple of days as well, and he set some decent lap times, but Alfa Romeo didn't necessarily show anything too great for me. Last year, they made a lot of headlines with the front wing design, so a lot of hype was around them in the preseason testing. But I think that Alfa Romeo, heading into this season, it seems like they're right around that point. We put them at 8th, and I think that that's kind of where they're going to be at to start the 2020 season. And kind of, I'm not sure if they'll be able to improve a whole lot on where they were last season. They kind of took a step back last season, but I also think it's because the other teams ahead took a big leap forward. So I think having them at 8th is probably roughly where they're going to be, I think, in 2020. So then at 7th, we have the newly named AlphaTauri.
Yeah. And we talked about it in our season preview. This is a team we're excited to see what they do in 2020, because they were probably the most improved in 2019. And it's hard to be the most improved in a 1 year and then to kind of keep improving on that the next year. But AlphaTauri still put in some good times. They had the 6th most laps in testing with 769. 11th fastest time in terms of, out of the 20 drivers.
Yep.
But, that was only on maybe the C3. There was only on the C3 tire. C3 tire. But yeah, they still have room for improvement, but to build on what they have, they're kind of just in the same position they were at the end of last season. Nothing too great, they didn't drop down a little bit, but yeah.
I think they're still going to be in contention to score podiums this season.
For
of course,
sure.
They got 2 last year.
Yeah.
But like you mentioned, I mean, yeah, 11th fastest time, you think, oh, that's not too great, but only on the C3 tire, which is much harder. Whereas you look at the drivers ahead, all set them predominantly on that fastest C5 tire. So
Yeah.
it seems like they still have a lot of pace in the bag. Now, I think that we'll need to see probably around 6 or 7 races before Alpha Tauri really have to start putting in some big, strong performances. But I think that the midfield, and we talked about this in our season preview, which, by the way, you could check out in the link down below in the video and watch that podcast. But I think that the midfield battle is going to be so tight that Alpha Tauri might be the one on the outside looking in for that best of the rest spot. But I think that they're going to be very, very close with the likes of Renault and McLaren and Racing Point.
For sure.
So then in 6th place rankings, we got Renault. So Renault, again, this is very close with the next couple of teams that we have ranked ahead of him in terms of where we see the midfield battle. But going into 2020, we put Renault at 6 just because they had a good testing. They set some pretty fast lap times with Daniel Ricciardo. They had the 3rd fastest time, which was set on the C5 tire. They had a significant increase in their long run pace compared to last season, which is good. But as I mentioned before too in our other podcast, I'm not exactly sold yet on the Renault pace. You know, they were quite disappointing in 2019. They're saying a lot of things to hype themselves up, saying they've got the fastest engine. They've made a lot of improvements, but I want to wait until I see them on the track and putting in good, consistent results. So 6th place right now, I think, is where I'll tentatively put them.
Yeah, for sure. And they're one of the 2 teams going into this year with a new driver lineup. You know, obviously still keeping Daniel Ricciardo from last year, but having Esteban Ocon come in. You know, we'll see where their partnership takes them, because it's going to be a really interesting partnership with, you know, an older veteran driver and a younger driver.
So then entering the top 5, in 5th place, Racing Point. And a lot of people and a lot of pundits out there were putting Racing Point as best of the rest. And the reason why we don't have them in those rankings as well is because we think that the team ahead of them are better poised to finish best of the rest, and we'll get to them after. But Racing Point obviously put a lot of headlines out in winter testing with the pink Mercedes, the Tracing Point, whatever you want to call them. But basically a lot of the Mercedes W10 being copied in the car design for this season, and that car looked fantastic on track. It was on rails, setting fastest sector 1 times. And when you're looking at the lap stats, the 4th most laps was 782. Sergio Perez had the 7th fastest time, but again, only on the C3 tire. So I think a lot of extra pace still in the bag for Racing Point.
Sure.
They didn't do any massive performance runs, so I think that they've got a lot more to unleash. And I think that the partnership with Lawrence Stroll has all settled down now, and we're starting to see the results come through. Now, the only question is, Sergio Perez, we know, can deliver podiums, and we know can deliver consistent top 10 finishes, Q3 appearances, but can Lance Stroll do the same? We know Lance Stroll can get a podium, but he's struggled in qualifying. So will Lance Stroll be able to support Sergio Perez and carry the team together? I think entering the season, I think 5th place is where we put them, just because it kind of seemed like that's where roughly they were. Even though they surprised so many teams and made a lot of headlines, I still don't think that they're necessarily best of the rest just at this moment.
Yeah, and I think the big storyline for Racing Point and Lance Stroll last year was, you know, did he deserve that Racing Point seat? You know, with the whole Lawrence Stroll takeover, and I think he proved himself. He really does deserve to be in that seat. He put in, you know, some solid top 10 finishes last year where he could, and you know, like we mentioned before, he was the only driver on Racing Point to be in 1st place.
Yeah, right.
So I mean, he's definitely showed that he deserves to be in that seat, and I think now that he's proven that, he's got to prove that he's among you know, those top 5, top 6 teams that we're talking about this year, and to be competing with those other drivers, you know, putting consistent top 10 finishes, not just a few here and there. But yeah, consistency is going to be a big thing for Lance Stroll this year, and I think Racing Point have showed that they're a very capable team to be fighting for, you know, in that midfield. So.
Yeah, agree with you there. And so the team that we have coming in as best of the rest heading into the 2020 season, in 4th place, we got McLaren.
Yeah, and I think this is a very obvious choice with how they performed last year, what they showed in testing. They were the third team with the most laps completed with 802. And it seemed like in testing, they were trying to figure out their issues from last year, which was, their long run pace. There was a lot of times that either it was Carlos Sainz or Lando Norris, who would just couldn't make quite the end of the race and just a random car issue that wouldn't expect. So it seemed like they really focused on that this year because we know their short run pace is good. We've seen Carlos Sainz get that podium finish. We've seen both Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz fighting to be fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, in those top 10 finishes and to be the best of the rest. So.
Yeah. Yeah, struggled at times in the race pace, and I'm glad you brought up the long run pace because they were actually only one of 3 teams to increase in long run pace in this season's testing compared to last season as well. So good signs for McLaren, and that's why we put them ahead of Racing Point. Is like, yes, Racing Point did look quicker at times. They did make more of the headlines, but I think that McLaren, they've already got that foundation of finishing 4th last season, and now they're just building on top of that.
For sure.
And
I was going to say, like I mentioned for AlphaTauri, it's hard to be one of the most improved teams and still continue that consistency going into the new year, and McLaren showed that they're here to be the best of the rest. That was not a one-off 4th place position that they won, they're here to fight for it, so.
Yeah, and they also had one of their best testings in the last couple of years, and like you mentioned, third most laps behind Mercedes and Red Bull, Mercedes and Ferrari. Yes, excuse me on that one. So the fact that they were able to complete that much laps, car seems reliable. They didn't have too many issues or little niggles, and again, they were looking more on that long run pace. So I'm excited for McLaren, and I think heading into this season, they do seem like they are the best of the rest.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
And just before we get into the top 3, we like we said in our preseason podcast that whole midfield battle, I think we're going to see teams jumping up and down from 4th to 7th, even maybe 4th to 8th.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to come down to what it was last year, and it was between McLaren and Toro Rosso. I think it's going to be 3-4 teams fighting for that 4th position this year, 4th, 5th, and all those positions in general. So.
All right, so getting into the top 3 of the F1 teams heading into 2020 season, and in 3rd place we have Ferrari. And Ferrari, I don't know how if it was possible, but it seemed like they took a step back even from last year.
Yeah, they probably had the most confusing preseason testing out of all the teams. Because in terms of, their long run pace, they look really good. They did a lot of tests. They improved on, I wouldn't say improved. They worked on what they really needed to last year, which was getting both those cars through the finish line. But it's weird to see them to not improve on their 2019. The 2019 times, we were expecting a little bit more for Ferrari going into the season, especially with how they were. We kind of wrote them off at the beginning of the season, but they improved and then they kind of fell off. So I was hoping for more of an improvement.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a concern, and why we put them at 3rd place, because they were the only team to not improve on that 2019 time. And I mean, maybe they had a lot of sandbags on the car, we're not sure, but it just didn't seem like they were sandbagging because they were struggling, and a lot of the sad faces around the team almost, it seemed that they kind of knew what's coming in the 2020 season.
Yeah.
And now they had a few issues. Vettel did stop on track one of the days, but they still completed 844 laps.
Yeah.
Only behind Mercedes. So from that standpoint, car still looks reliable. They were able to pump in a lot of laps. They had the 4th fastest time. So let's wait and see. We're gonna have to play the waiting game with Ferrari. But as it stands, they do seem like the 3rd best team, which might not be a bad thing because remember to last year in testing, they seemed like the best team.
Yeah.
They seemed like they were going to run away with the championship, and then they fell pretty hard when it came to the regular season. So I just, from what I think you summed it up perfectly, that it was just super confusing and a lot of drama going on at Ferrari with the whole power unit issues. It doesn't seem like they have a very fast power unit this year compared to last year. Mm-hmm. They've made some improvements in terms of the slow speed sectors in Sector 3. They are quicker, but pretty puzzling form for them in 2019. So I think the safe bet is to kind of put them in that 3rd place and hope that they surprise everybody.
Yeah, no, exactly. You said it perfectly.
All right, coming down to the final 2 teams, down to 1 and 2. Now, at number 2, we've put Red Bull Racing as the 2nd best team in preseason testing heading into the 2020 in our rankings. And we think that the second place position for Red Bull. They do seem like currently they have the second best car on the grid. They did a lot more than Ferrari in terms of impressing us with pace. Obviously, they improved on their 2019 time, and they seem like they have a pretty good car. Of course, they did some pretty significant redesign with the nose. A lot of different little bits and pieces on that car, whereas Ferrari kind of stayed sort of stagnant to 2019, a very similar car. But when you look at the stats, fifth most complete laps for Red Bull and the second fastest time in testing, also on the C4 tire. And it seemed like the Honda engine was fairly reliable, which is a good sign for them. And I think that the integration with Honda and Red Bull this season, we're really going to see that come to fruition and have a really good partnership. So I think Red Bull, yes, they did have some issues. Max Verstappen had some spins. They spent some time off track, kind of resulting in some issues. But I think Red Bull might be hiding a couple extra tenths in their pocket. And I think that they're ready to foot the challenge to Mercedes. Now, we're just not sure if they're able to continue that for the whole season.
Yeah, I know reliability was kind of a big thing for them last year. They wouldn't get the proper starts that they needed. So it's nice to see that, they're still testing the reliability of the car. They haven't kind of been like, oh, okay, no, we'll just leave it. We'll expect those 1 or 2 wins throughout the season and try to stick on that. But yeah, I think there was a big question going into them to this year is that Honda engine going to be reliable all season? We saw a couple races where it did really well, but I think Red Bull are also one of the teams that took the most penalties last year in terms of adding upgrades to their engines or having to swap out engines as well. So yeah, it's like you said, they still look like a really good team to be challenging for the championship. And I agree. I think Red Bull might be sandbagging a little bit. I think they kind of know that this is a good year for them with how Ferrari's looking and how Mercedes are kind of looking. But yeah, I agree.
So then obviously it puts Mercedes as the number one team heading into the 2020 season. And I think pretty obvious as you started the list that you're going to guess this team being number one. And coming off of 6 consecutive world championships, you had the question, okay, it seemed like they were going to maybe take a step back. Maybe this was the year. But then they come out with all this innovation, the DAS system, the rear suspension, and they seem like they're even better than they were last year. They led the field in terms of the most laps completed with 903. Now, the only big question mark in winter testing and heading into this season is the engine reliability. We saw Lewis Hamilton have an issue. We saw a lot of the other customer teams like Williams have a lot of issues with the Mercedes power unit. So the only big question mark with Mercedes is how is that power unit going to be problematic in 2020? A lot of other customer engines like Renault in the past have had big reliability issues. So have Mercedes possibly have a fault in that? Other than that, they still look like the team to beat 100%. And even though Red Bull have seemed to make improvements, they still have that advantage over Red Bull and over Ferrari, and they've also brought new innovations to the car. We'll see how much DAS results in lap time and different things like that, but Mercedes somehow still managed to improve on what was already a dominant last 6 seasons, and they might have just gotten even better.
Yeah, I mean, they said they kind of addressed their overheating issue last year, but did that add on to their engine reliability issue? Did they bring down something there and then cause this issue? So yeah, like you said, it's going to be an interesting season for Mercedes because we know they're still going to be in that top 2 contention, even top 1 contention, really. But did they immediately go back to the UK and work out the issues that they had in testing? So yeah, we'll see.
Well, that's it for the F1 Power Rankings heading into the 2020 season. Let us know what you think of our list. Do you agree with our rankings of the teams heading into this season? If you don't, comment your own rankings down below from 10 to 1, and we'd love to hear from you, and we'll try and get back to as many comments as we can. But that is the first edition of the Backmarkers F1 Show Power Rankings. If you like this video, subscribe to our channel down below. Hit the bell for the notifications so you never miss a video, and also check out our other podcasts and content on our channel, the Backmarkers F1 Show, and also check out our website, tbmf1show.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.